And today's challenge is going to be getting a shake out of the drivetrain of this 3-inch lifted Cherokee XJ. Issue is that I recently replaced the springs. It had the stock springs with an addle leaf, and I had to go to a long shackle. And in the process, I installed a double cardan rear drive shaft, all groovy. I put in some spacers, some shims in the between the perches and the axle, and got the angle pretty good on one of these double cardan drive shafts. You want the angle from the differential pointed straight up the drive shaft, and you can see it's clearly a little bit lower. That's mainly due to the replacement of the long shackles with shorter shackles. That just cranked the whole thing down. So I've now got 6-degree shims in the perches, okay, and they're still coming up short. So I'm going to take a quick measurement and see just how much distance I have to make up, or how much of an angle I have to make up. All right, the nice thing is that they built in, this is a Chrysler differential, and they built in the little lip there, which happens to be aligned with the center line of the differential pretty well. So I'm just going to go ahead and take a measurement on that. It doesn't really matter if it's level or not, because what matters is the difference between this angle, which is right at, it's a little bit sketchy because there's some printing stamped in there, so let's call it 10 degrees of an angle there. So it's angled up 10 degrees, and I'll do the same, try to get the angle here right, and again, you got to be a little bit careful. So I've got 15.5 degrees. So basically I've got to figure out a way to bring up the nose of the differential as much as 5.5 degrees. Now they recommend stopping a couple degrees short, because under torque, under power, the differential twists a bit because of the leaf springs. So I could do 3.5 degrees and call it good. Now some people will do a transfer case drop, which is a way to do it, but I run the numbers, and a 1-inch drop will only give me about 0.7 degrees, and that's just not going to be worth doing. If you notice, my transfer case cross member here has already been abused from rocks in the Arizona desert, so dropping it 1 inch doesn't really sound like a great idea to me anyway. Okay, one of the more accurate ways to measure the pinion angle is off the bolts on the back. So if I can stop moving it around here, it's coming in at 10.7 degrees. And based on the new and improved differential / pinion angle of 10.7 and our drive shaft angle of 15.5, that means we need to bring the nose of the differential up 4.8 degrees to get it in line with the drive shaft. Subtract the 2 degrees that is used to allow for axle wrap, and that means we need to bring the nose of the differential or the pinion angle up 2.8 degrees for everything to work. There are my 6-degree shims that I put in. They're a little different design. They're open back, so the overly wide slot extends forward, and you can see inside this one. What I had to do to make it work was I had to add some just washers underneath the head to make it extend far enough. As I mentioned before, I want to stop about 2 degrees short of that, so that means 3 degrees, which math major will tell you is going to leave me about 1 degree short. I'm thinking that probably won't make a big difference. I should be correcting 2/3 of my issue, assuming I really need 3 degrees, going from a 6 to an 8. So I'll be improving the angle by 2 degrees, and if that doesn't quite do it, and then I can consider possibly going with that transfer case drop option, which is, like I said, it's not what I want to do, but it would probably get the job done without any further hassle. Another option I have would be to get slightly longer shackles on the rear here, because dropping the rear of the leaf spring will also take the axle with it. So I've done the math on that, and I figure if I go about 3 inches here, which I don't want to do, it will give me about 3 degrees of correction, which would take care of it. The problem is, whenever I first did the new springs, I did have lift shackles on here to make up for my previous underwhelming under-designed springs to get my full 3 inches of lift on the back. And I got to tell you, driving around was not fun. It just did not feel right, so I don't want to do that. But it's always possible I could get something that's just a little bit longer than this, you know, maybe another inch. Won't affect the ride quality or the height too much, and will give me a little bit of angle I need, so I might try that. Got the new shims ordered. I've got new longer centering pins ordered just to make sure I have something that's long enough to go through everything I'm stacking up. And I will be back whenever they arrive. And like magic, the stuff just shows up. Got my 8-degree shims. As you can see, a little different design than the other ones. These are actually much better shims. These are steel, number one. And number two, they hold the bolt in place in this recess, okay, which is going to place it better and help align the springs and the axle together. I had to get longer bolts because the added height of this shim has to be taken into account when you're doing the stack up. So all we got to do is get them installed. And now I like to get the sway bar out of the way. Some people just pull this mount off and just move it with the sway bar, but I just find it easier to go ahead and remove the sway bar connection itself from the mount separately. Okay, I'm just going to use a vice grip on the sway bar up against the mount here, or up against this, depending on how you align it. We'll hold that up and out of the way so you don't have to deal with it. Okay, next step, I'm going to remove all the U-bolts, both U-bolts, all 4 bolts here, to get this side loose. And I'm going to loosen the bolts on the other side just to get a little bit of movement. Now, if I was starting from scratch and there wasn't already a shim in the other side, I would probably remove both sides. But in this case, since I'm only changing the angle a couple degrees, all I have to do is loosen the other side and remove these. Okay, 19 millimeter and a breaker bar to break everything loose. And there's a couple different ways to go about this next step. I'm going to remove this bolt that goes through the leaf spring. Now, the thing is, this spring is under a lot of tension. If you just remove this nut, this thing is going to expand. It's going to go crazy. You could pinch your fingers. At the very least, it's going to be a real pain to recompress it, get it all lined up, get all the you can see the shims in here between the leaves, get all that lined up. So what you want to do is you can put a C-clamp on the leaf spring and just tighten it down good and tight. That should hold it. Or you can use you can use a floor jack or a bottle jack and just push up on the leaf spring to hold it in place. And in this case, I'm using a small floor jack, so it doesn't quite have the reach it needs to get from the floor to the leaf spring, but this will be adequate. You can see it's just barely lifting it, but that's really all you have to worry about. You want to make sure it's good and snug. And now I'm going to remove this nut. It's a 13 millimeter ½ inch, so I can swap the bolt out. Okay, you can see very little movement. You can tell the spring is under some tension, even so though, because of the movement you did see. Now I just got to get the old bolt out and get the new one stuck in. It's snug in there. It's not really pinched, but it's tight enough between all the different layers it's going through. In this case, I just had to unthread it a little bit. You can see how short the bolt is. I'll show you the new one now. And there you go. And you can see, is this an overkill? Oh, absolutely. It's going to go through anything that you're ever likely to stack up. Thing is, it doesn't matter because there's nothing up here to interfere. So next step is to assemble this with the spacer and the head here that goes into the locating hole here in the perch. Goes in the bottom, of course, like so, and then with any luck we can get that in there. Now you can see what the problem I have now is that the bolt is actually just a little bit too long to be able to get in there. Now I have a couple options. I can drop the axle further. It's pretty close to as far down as it's likely to want to go. And if the layers are fighting it just a little bit, you might be able to line them up a little bit better using a screwdriver or similar tool, so you can get everything lined up, let the bolt through. And you can see that the centering pin is now in position. It's back a little bit. The axle needs to be moved, which is easy enough, into position. But I'm going to start raising this end of the axle with my small floor jack. I could use the big one to mate those two positions up. Get it loosely held in place with the U-bolts again, and then go to work on the other side. And you can, because I'm using a floor jack, it's on wheels, and I can get it up to the point where the little nub is just ready to drop in there. I don't know if you'll be able to see that on this shot, but get it down to the point where it's just making contact, and you should be able to rock it back and drop it right into where it needs to be. You can kind of feel it. Okay, it's engaged now. So I'm going to jack this side up, and you can see it's rotating the shim on this edge right here. So as I lift it, you can see the gap between the front of the shim and the perch shrinking as the centering pin is in place and doing its job. I'm going to go ahead and put on the U-bolts loosely so that they'll hold it in place while I do the other side. Okay, good enough for now. We'll go to the other side. And on this one, I'm just going to do more or less real time so you can see what's going on, although I will speed it up for the video. Okay folks, sorry for knocking the camera a little bit out of alignment in the middle of that process, but you can see it went very quickly and very easily. Alright, and as sometimes happens in a job like this, you notice part of the way through it that you end up with another issue, and the issue is whenever I insert the sway bar bolt, it runs into the bolt that holds the leaf pack and the shim in place. Now there's a couple ways I could handle this. I could take this apart, or I could cut it in place and just cut this down. That would be fairly easy. But quite honestly, there's an easier way, and I'll show you what the lazy man does. Okay, now that I've got it off, what I can do is just pick up the link, slide it into place, slide the bolt through from the back, push it back down into place, and go do the same on the other side. Now the sway bar and the bolt are installed from the inside out on both sides. I can reinstall the outside U-bolt through both the bracket and the bracket for the sway bar. So about the only downside to this scheme is that the access to this nut is a little reduced, so you have to use a wobble socket, a wobble extension on your socket to get on there. So go ahead and run these guys down. Okay, now I can connect the sway bar with the 18mm hardware and hopefully still get my ratchet on, if only barely. Okay. And good and tight, ready to go. And just to make sure I get the torque required on it, I'm going to use the old tried and true double wrench trick to increase my torque, my leverage. Alright, the floor jack is under the differential, lifted it high enough to get the rear wheels back on. So that's the next step. The end result, I'm coming up to speed, nothing yet, but I can feel it coming on here, and as I accelerate, you can probably hear that it's just coming in at 65. That's a lot better than it was. I mean, I've definitely done some good. I will definitely have to take it a step further to really get rid of all the shake at Arizona highway speeds, which the speed limit is 75 miles per hour between cities, so you really want to make sure you get rid of it. Alright, I've driven it and gotten a chance for the drivetrain to settle out and get into its normally scheduled position, and I'm going to double check the angles. Okay, and using my handy dandy phone angle finder here, I'm getting 15.1, let's call it 15 degrees of angle here. The problem is the phone is not absolutely flat along the side, so 15 degrees. And along the bolts on the rear of the differential, I'm getting 12.2, which ties in pretty close to what I was expecting. Just around 3 degrees difference between the angle of the differential and the drive shaft, which you can kind of see there. Now, one of the things I suspect is another variable is that these springs are really very stiff. They probably don't wind up as much as some other springs do, as much as stock springs do. So that 2 degrees target is probably a little high. I probably should be shooting for a little bit under that. So at this point, I need to find another degree or so. And I think I'm probably going to end up going with a transfer case drop. And the reason for that is that the back, as you can see if you look really closely, is just a little bit higher than the front already. So the longer shackles are an option, but not one I really want to use. So next step, transfer case drop.